but it's a serious subject, and a subject which I think is of great concern here in the state of California, and it must be a matter of great concern across the United States. It's getting to be a greater and greater problem, and a matter which I think we can do something about. It's demeaning to the recipient, and it's unsatisfactory to the taxpayer, and I believe that we should move in a different direction than we are at the present time. I would like to outline my views. But as I say, it's just one subject, and I know that you're interested in other matters as well, and I will be glad to answer questions afterwards. It's 2 hours difference on my time, so if you clap a lot, you make me feel better. It's awfully hot here, though, isn't it? Did I take my... I'll start anyway without... You ready? All right. Shh. Quiet. Quiet. This is a year of choice for this state and for the nation. In the election and in this primary, the question is one which Emerson told us would always be the choice of man. The choice between memory and hope, the opposition of past and future. That we can and that we must help others to help themselves, but we cannot again try to do the job for another government with the people for them. There is opposition between past and future in our structure of government, where the demands of tomorrow are for a vastly simplified system of federal aid, one which leaves the priorities and detailed decisions to people in their own local communities. Nowhere are the demands for tomorrow more plain than in the area of our greatest domestic failure, the system of welfare, public assistance to those in need. Welfare is many things to many people. To the recipient, it may be the difference between life and starvation, between a house and homelessness, between the cold wind and a child's coat. To the taxpayer, facing inflation and the cost of living, paying for his home and educating his children, welfare may be the unwarranted imposition of an already overburdened tax bill. What really is welfare? There are about 29 million Americans in poverty. About 1/4 of them receive some kind of public assistance. Usually not even enough to live at the poverty level, and the others must fend for themselves entirely. The average person on welfare receives each month $89 if he is blind, $80 if permanently and totally disabled. Dependent children receive $39 a month on a national average. But that average means that children receive $60 a month in New York and $8.35 a month in the state of Mississippi. Even at these minimal levels, the national bill for public assistance has been spiraling upward at an increasingly rapid rate. It now totals more than $6 billion a year. And these totals will rise further as more and more poor people leave farms and die in small towns all over this country. The bill is rising every day. With all this enormous expenditure, might we not expect that the recipients would be satisfied? Yet the fact is that they are not. They are as dissatisfied with the welfare system as anybody else within the United States. They organize and protest and sit in at welfare offices. Is this rank ingratitude, or is it an indication of how the welfare system has failed within our country? For what are we to make of a system which seems to satisfy neither the giver nor the recipient, which embitters all those who come in contact with it? I would contend that the root problem is our very concept of welfare. Welfare began as a necessary program of assistance for those unable to work, but we have tried to make it an easy answer to the problems of unemployment as well. Our society is full of men without work. 1 million officially counted as unemployed, over 1.5 million who can find only part-time or occasional jobs, over 500,000 more who have become so discouraged that they no longer look for work, and especially in the black ghettos of the great cities, hundreds of thousands who have dropped out from sight, without home or family, unseen by all computers and agencies of the government. When one looks at the unemployment rolls and when one looks at the census, one has to understand that between a third and a fifth of all of the people that live in the ghettos are lost. They're never even counted. That we never see them and they never find them, we never find them, and they're never counted on any government rolls or even on the census. So we have to add a third or a fifth to all of the figures when we're talking about unemployment. When we talk about the fact that there's 3.5% unemployment in the United States and it's twice as high for black people, 3 times as high in some places, that gets you up to 10%. Then you have to add another fifth or a third to that figure, because those people are never even counted in any census, are never even counted in any agency or by any department. They're just lost like spent matches, and really the only time we ever hear from them is time of violence or rioting. These millions are men like other men. They're like men like you and I. They marry and have children, or they do not marry. If you elect me president, be cheaper that way, I'll tell you. Or some of these men do not marry, but they have children just the same. And really the basic reason in many areas of the United States is the fact that you can't receive any welfare for your children unless the children are illegitimate. If the children are legitimate and the father's around, or if the father stays at home with the children, then all aid and all the assistance to the child is cut off. There's no assistance to the wife or the child in most areas of the United States if the father remains with the family and if the children are legitimate and he stays at home. If the children are illegitimate, they don't starve. But if they are legitimate, under our system that we've established in our society, in most parts of the United States, they don't get any assistance. They don't get any help. So the result is that in most parts of this country, the illegitimate children, the number of illegitimate children amongst the poor depend on welfare is going dramatically up, because that's the only way a father can stay with that's the only way in which any kind of assistance can be given to the child, or any kind of assistance can be given to the family. And that's the system that we've established here within the United States. In either case, whether they are married or not, they often leave home under the strain of joblessness and under the strain of poverty. We have dealt with the resulting broken homes, not by putting men to work, but by giving the mothers and the children welfare. They might have wanted fathers, and they might have wanted husbands. We have given them instead checks and a dole. In fact, the welfare system itself, as I said, has created many of these fatherless families by requiring the absence of the father as a precondition for receiving aid. More basically, welfare itself has done much to divide people from one another, to alienate us from one another. Partly this separation comes from the understandable resentment of the taxpayer, helplessly watching the welfare rolls and the property taxes rise. In the city of New York, for instance, the welfare cost in the city alone is $700 million a year. It will be $1 billion a year in a couple of years. If all of the people were on welfare, who could be on welfare and knew about welfare and knew about that they were entitled to welfare, the cost in the city of New York alone would be $1.5 billion right at the present time. So there's no question all of these great cities in the United States, with the welfare system as we have it in the United States, and why it's a matter of such great concern to me, all of these cities are going to be bankrupt because they can't possibly exist. They're just paying out. Those who get some wealth, they go and live in the suburbs. Those who get some money, those who become more affluent, they live in the suburbs. In the meantime, the people flow in from eastern Kentucky. They flow in from Alabama. They flow in from Mississippi. There are no jobs. They go on welfare, and they receive a welfare check. The city has to pay that welfare. And the result is that the city is getting, each city across the United States, each of our urban centers faces a more and more grave problem as they receive less and less money in, have to raise taxes and thus drive more and more people out, and use most of the money, or a large portion of the money, as a welfare payment or a dole to those people who come to the city, can't find jobs, and just live there in such poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, unemployment is having nothing to do, which means nothing to do with the rest of us. It's not just a question of receiving a check. It's not just a question of staying at home. But it's really just basically staying there and having nothing to do. To be without work, to be without use to one's fellow citizens, is to be, in truth, the invisible man, which Ralph Ellison wrote. And as John Adams said a century ago, it is to be wholly overlooked, to know it, and that is intolerable. And the fact is that what does happen? What doesn't have any work? The children look at you, your wife looks at you, you stay at home, and there's no place to go. And you are completely lost in our society. You're no use to yourself, and you're no use to your fellow man, and you know it. And that's the most unsatisfactory part of welfare, the welfare system that we've established here in the United States. First is the myth that the poor and the unemployed do not want to work. All disinterested investigations, most recently the President's Riot Commission, have found that the unemployed do want to work. I myself have met and spoken with these men, whether they live in Watts or eastern Kentucky, from Harlem to Atlanta, and without exception, they have said, no more welfare, give us jobs, that's what we want. Here in California, in Oakland, just a year ago, there was a job fair. 15,000 men and youths came looking for jobs, and there were 250 jobs for the 15,000, and the rest were sent home. Of course, there are those in America who do not want to work, but they are, I think, far more likely to be children of favored families than they are to be the men and the youth of the poor of this country. Second is the myth that the problems of welfare can be solved by slogans, by getting tough, or by cutting back, by making the system even more harsh and more punitive than it now is. But it helps nothing and no one to rail at or condemn welfare recipients if there are no jobs for them to take. It will only leave a greater social problem to our own children if we force millions of other children to grow up without fathers. Slogans, as you have here in California seen, do not automatically result in lower taxes. Third is the most pernicious myth of all. That is the myth that all the problems of poverty can be solved by the ultimate extension of the welfare system, to guarantee to all, regardless of their circumstances, a certain income paid for by the federal government. Any such scheme simply cannot provide the sense of self-sufficiency or participation in the life of the community that is essential for all citizens of a democracy. And I think those who are advocating that kind of a plan at the present time in the United States, particularly, as I say, that I think it destroys the whole idea behind the dignity of the individual and the dignity and the importance of the family, but also with a debt of some $20 billion, I think are misleading the American people and performing a disservice. At this time, if we put such a scheme into effect, it would have to be maintained at a very, very low level, which would only make dependency and separation between our people more permanent. Most of all, it would postpone, perhaps until too late, the massive efforts to create new jobs that we know is the only real solution to this problem. Certainly all the proposals for various systems of income maintenance deserve careful study, but if there is anything that we have learned over the period of the last 3 years, it is that we cannot do everything at once, that we must understand, establish, and adhere to a clear sense of national priorities within our own country. And it seems to me that the priority here is a matter of jobs and employment. To give priority to income payments would be to admit defeat on this critical battlefront. And the worst thing we could do would be to pretend to the poor or to ourselves that we could give them a pittance to leave us alone. We need their productivity, and them and for others. Once, however, that we have begun to move toward real employment, it will be imperative to move also toward an adequate system of assistance for those who cannot work to enable them to lead decent lives. Meanwhile, it is urgently necessary to reform certain features of the present welfare system. Let me just say that, just for a moment, digress for a moment on the question of jobs. First, I think the government has to be the employer of last resort. That there are many things that need to be done across the United States, whether it's in our urban areas of the United States or whether it's in our rural areas of this country, whether it's to deal with water pollution or the construction of a playground or the construction of a school. There is all that work that needs to be done across this country. I think the government should be the employer of the last resort. But second, beyond that, I would give tax credits and tax incentives along the lines of legislation I introduced a year and a half ago. Give tax credits and tax incentives to the private sector, to private industry, to go into areas where there is unemployment or where people are living on welfare, and to hire them, to take them off welfare or take them off the unemployed list and hire them, put them to work, and make them taxpayers instead of recipients of money. The affluent part of the United States is being cut off from those who are poor. The second part of it is that we've made many speeches and we've made many pronouncements about what we're going to do about it, and the fact is that the situation gets steadily worse in many parts of the United States instead of better. And the third fact is that we've had the speeches, we've had the pronouncements, we've had the study, we've had the reports, we've had the commissions, and they've all made the same report, and it seems to me it's about time that the United States began to act on it. We have to reestablish our national priorities. I think it's very well for us to fight 12,500 miles away for the liberty and freedom of others, but I think we should do our first responsibility is give liberty and freedom to our own people. I'm pleased that our course of action has changed and that we're now at the negotiating table. And I hope, like all of you and like all Americans, that those negotiations are successful. But I think we have to remember that while those negotiations go on, that we still have Americans are still dying there, that some 365 died there last week, that we're still more than 1,000 were wounded last week, and the devastation of South Vietnam goes on while those discussions take place, and this is partially our responsibility. I want to see the South Vietnamese take over the major burden of that struggle. I want to... I want to see an end to the corruption and the dishonesty. I want to make sure that as we spend $3, as we raise $3 of taxpayers' money across the United States for the refugees, I am not satisfied and I'm not content, realizing that only one of those $3 ever reaches the refugees in Vietnam. And I'm not going to be content while a young man is drafted, whether in the state of California or the state of New York or any place across the United States, and sent to Vietnam, and a young man with enough money can buy his way out of the draft in Vietnam. And I want to bring not only our American soldiers back, but I want to take the $85 million that we spend every day, the $4 million that we spend as we've been sitting and standing here. I want to take that $85 million a day, or $600 million a week, and start to put our own budget in balance here in the United States and start spending some of that money on our own needs in this country. If I can be elected President of the United States with your help, that's what I'm going to do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we sit down? I'll answer questions for about 10 minutes. I'm sure you're all hot and you've been waiting here. Can you sit down?